So welcome back to CriCri Aviation. My name is Jim Payne, and in this video we are going to complete most of the structure of the forward fuselage between frame 4 and frame 7. Now, this video ended up really long, so what I've decided to do is break this up into 3 segments. So there's going to be 3 separate videos that cover what's been completed here. And so in the first video, I'm primarily going to focus on creating frame 6 and also making the side supports for the seat box. They actually get mounted between frame 4 and frame 6, so they kind of go together. And the other thing that we're going to work on in the first video also is there's a flight control tube that mounts between the seat box right behind frame 4, and it's actually underneath the seat pan here, so you really can't see it. But there are some bearing blocks that we need to make out of phenolic that get attached to the side of the seat supports and frame 4. They get bolted into place. And so one of the things we're going to do when we work on the seat box is we're also going to work on those phenolic bearing blocks that support that flap control tube that goes underneath the seat. In the second video, what we're going to focus on is actually completing the side supports for the seat. That's going to include riveting and some gluing. We're also going to start working on frame 5. And then we're going to save for the final video, we're going to do the final installation of frame 5 and all of the side stiffening that's happening here between frame 3 all the way to frame 7. The other thing that we're going to cover is we are going to do the final gluing and installation and riveting of frame 7. And we're also going to do all of the 3 seatbelt connections that happen. One is here on the right and left side of the seat box, but then there's also a strap support that goes here attached to frame 4 that gets bolted into place. We'll cover that in this video series along with creating and bending the seat pan. So there's a lot of stuff going on here, but at the end of this series of 3 videos, we're basically going to have the structure of the bottom and side of the forward fuselage complete. Please, as always, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and remember to follow me on Instagram and Facebook. The links are in the description, so stick around, and thanks for watching. All right, what we're going to start working on next here is frame 5 and frame 6. Now, frame 5, I've got just the sheet metal parts here that need to be bent. Frame 5 is made similar to frame 3 in that we have to bend side pieces that overlap each other. But frame 5 does not have a cross member that goes across the bottom like frame 3. This will also have some plates that go on top of here because the sole purpose of this frame, or the main purpose of this frame, is for the rear wing pin attach brackets for the wings. So the other thing we're going to work on is frame 6 here. Now, frame 6 is a complete frame. However, it's only one-sided in that we don't have to have the double, the double parts here for the side frames that we need to connect together. These only have a single part that's bent on either side that gets attached to a single member that's bent and goes across the bottom. And so if we go look in the fuselage here, you can see what we're going to be working on is frame 5, which mounts right here, and that's the wing attach pinhole, the rear wing attach pinhole there. And then there's frame 6 that goes here. And the reason that frame 5 here does not have a cross member that goes across is because this is where we're going to actually install the seat pan. The seat pan mounts between frame 4 and frame 6. So the only purpose, again, mainly of this frame 5 here is going to be for those wing attach pin holes to connect, similar to what we did here on frame 3, only aft of the center spar. So I'm going to just start by bending these pieces and just starting to fit them in here. Again, like I've done before, I've already drilled the holes in the fuselage panels here for frame 5 and frame 6. So it's just a matter of me bending the parts, attaching them temporarily to the sides, then we'll determine where the cross member goes and start fixing that in place. Once we get frame 6 installed in here temporarily, then we'll work on the cross members here for the seat pan that need to be installed, and we'll start fitting those in place. Some of that gets a little bit complicated because it actually connects to part of the landing gear that's attached underneath the fuselage, at least the side brackets are. There's a lot of parts here that need to be made for the seat pan, so the seat pan is kind of complicated, but we'll work towards that after we get the frames initially installed in place. Okay, so I'm going to start out by just bending some of these. I think I'm going to start with frame 6 because that's the easiest one to do. I'll bend both the sides up here, I'll bend the bottom and the top of the cross member over, and we'll start fitting those into place. These are going to be a little bit more complicated because we've got all those angles and overlaps that we have to deal with. So I think I'm going to hold off on that one until after I finish setting up and installing frame 6 here. So I bent the bottom lip here on frame 6 on the cross member that goes over. The bottom gets bent at just 90 degrees, and I've already got the holes drilled into it that will go through the bottom of the fuselage. The top here, though, is another one of these bends that requires 2 bends, where there's a 6mm bend that goes along the top here. There's then a 12mm bend past that goes across there to give you that kind of that rolled over, you know, U shape or horseshoe shape. I just realized, though, that I think I might have been missing something here when I did frame 2, because I went back and looked at my bending brake when I was bending the bottom lip here and realized that if I were to bend the 6mm bend here first up to 90 degrees and then flip this around in the bending brake and then did the bend here up to the 12mm, technically my fingers for my bending brake should fit behind that, because the 6mm bend that's already bent into there would go 6mm in, but I'm 12mm up, which means as long as my fingers on my brake are 45 degrees, I should be able to do both of those bends without having to partially bend the 6mm and then pound it into shape using some kind of form afterwards. So I'm going to attempt to do that right now. I don't see why that won't work, or at least it should allow me to bend further than I did when I did frame 2. So it'll probably be in the comments section on frame 2 when I release that one. Somebody will mention that I should have just bent both of those at the same time. So I'm going to try that. I'll be back in a minute. Oh yeah, I just got back from my bending brake. That worked perfectly, so I feel stupid. But yeah, I'm sure Mr. Columbine obviously knew that. He just figured I would automatically know that since I should know how to use a bending brake. But anyway, that worked perfectly. You don't need to form that afterwards. It does give you a little bit tighter bend when you do that. It looks better too. So yeah, I'll remember that from now on. All right, let me get these side pieces bent to the right shape, and then we'll start fitting some of this in there. Okay, so I've got everything bent here now for frame 6. These actually bent pretty easy because it's just a 12mm flange on each side. The flange that goes along the fuselage does need to be bent at a little bit of an angle. It's a few degrees just to make sure that when it's in here that you know, the cross piece fits flat against these and that they're not angled because of the curvature of the fuselage. So what I'm going to do now is go ahead and just use the technique that I've used before, where I'm just going to put some blue tape on the back side of this, on the fuselage side, and just put a mark down the middle of it so that I can locate that through the existing fuselage holes that I've drilled. And I'll go ahead and drill and CliCo these into place on both sides, and then we'll go ahead and start fitting in this cross brace that goes in there. So yeah, let me go ahead and get these attached to the side of the fuselage, and then we'll start fitting this in place. All right, I've got frame 6 temporarily pinned into place with CliCos through the outside of the fuselage here, and I just put a CliCo in the corner of each one of this frame 6 just to hold it together. I'm not really going to go any further with it right now. I just finished cutting out one of the side panels here for the seat pan, or the seat box. This is what actually connects between frame 4 here and some of the angled brackets that we put on the back side of frame 4, and frame 6 over here, where we have to bend a little tab over with 3 rivets on it that attach to the back side of frame 6. Also, across the bottom here, we do need to bend a flange here that mounts to the bottom of the fuselage, and this does need to be curved. So I have cut the curve into this, and I'm going to go ahead and cut out an MDF form so that we can bend this over the form. Now, this is an area where we really can't put flutes in it So it's going to be interesting to see how well this bends, but we're going to have to try and get this bent to the right shape without putting flutes in it. As you can see, I have a lot of holes already drilled in here. Across the top here, there's rivets in every other hole, and then in between every hole, there is supposed to be an adjustment for the seat back. I don't even know exactly how that works at this point. I just know, according to the drawing, there's supposed to be holes there. So I went in and put those in. This is actually cut out to go around where the tube is going to go through, the 1¼ inch tube for the flap controls. So I think what I'm going to do is just try and get this bent first. I only cut one out because I want to check the fit on this before I cut out another one and the placement of some of these holes. So let me get the MDF form cut. We'll start bending this and we'll see how it fits in place once we put this back into the fuselage. I'm a little bit worried about the width and the distance and some of these holes lining up. So we'll just test it out. I'll start bending this and we'll see if it fits. Okay, I just finished cutting out the forms that I'm going to use to bend this lip along the bottom of the seat pan sides. So I'm just going to put some clamps on top of here and just go over to my table and just use a rubber mallet, see if I can bend this over and see how clean I can make it. I might actually go, because I do need to get some relief in these cuts, I think, or this bend. I think what I'm going to do is actually go to my sander first and sand an angle into the end of this, because since we are going to have to flatten this only with a mallet, I want it to be in its final form. Otherwise, when I try and push on it, it's just going to ripple if we try and bend it after we take it out of the form. So let me do that first. I'll bend this and I'll show you what it looks like when I'm done. You can see I cut a little bit of an angle into my form just to get this to bend over a little bit more and not quite have as much spring back from 90 degrees. I did have to take my fingers and just kind of bend it a little bit more, and it turned out pretty good. I mean, I've still got the nice curve there, and it does fit perfectly flat on the bottom of the fuselage, which is nice. This is going to go right about here, like so. Now there is also a 80 thousandths strip cap that goes underneath this, between the bottom of this and the fuselage. So the curvature is not going to be determined as much by the perfect shape of this between the bottom of the fuselage, but that cap that goes in between. And the only other thing you have to watch is that as you bend this thing further, even by hand, what it'll start to do is it'll start to curve this piece, because of course it's got stresses on the outside here that are trying to push it into a circle because it's longer technically here, and so you get a little bit of a warped look. But luckily it's such a small amount that I can easily just push it back into shape, which means when I go to put in these rivets here, I'll just be able to line up the rivet holes. It'll pull it straight. And then we're also going to put a fairly significant angle piece that goes across the top of here, which will keep the top straight. So I think this will work out just fine. I'm going to go ahead and cut the other piece and go ahead and bend that one and start fitting it in. And I'm also going to cut that cap piece that's going to go on the bottom here out of 80 thousandths. Now, the manual tells you that that cap should be 63 thousandths, but because of the thicker angles that we're using here on the frame 4, which are 16th inch angles, plus the 20 thousandths piece of bottom cover plate that's on this, that's on top of the skin here, we have to make sure that we're going to the proper thickness to get that side panel for the seat box to fit over the top of this, and we want it to be flush from there all the way across here with the cap. So I'm going to be cutting that cap out of 80 thousandths, not 63 thousandths, to make sure that it's flushed with the height of frame 4 there. So I'm going to go ahead and get that piece cut also, and then we'll start fitting frame 6 back in here and get these pieces fit in here so that we can get the alignment of frame 6 proper and make sure that we have the correct distance here, and that everything's fitting properly before we start permanently securing some of this into place. So I finished bending both of these side panels for the seat pan, and I also cut out these 80 thousandths caps that are supposed to go across the bottom of these frames here, and I pre-drilled all the holes. They all lined perfectly. I left this a little bit long, and then I trimmed some off the end just to make sure that I could get this perfectly flush with frame 6. I did start thinking about this, though. I made this out of 80 thousandths so I could make sure that I was level with the 16th inch plus the 20 thousandths of the angles that are on frame 4, but what I could have done is I could have just used the 63 thousandths one here, and then we could have joggled the end of this 20 thousandths so that it would fit then over the top of these angles properly. That could have been done, so it would have saved a little bit of weight instead of making the whole piece out of the correct thickness material, which is 80 thousandths. So I'm going to leave mine that way. A little extra support on the bottom of the seat probably wouldn't hurt, so I didn't figure the weight isn't going to make that much of a difference. But it's something that somebody else could do if they were doing this themselves. All right. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to keep fitting these parts in here. I've got to get some holes and some temporary sheet metal fasteners holding this onto the angle here on frame 4. I've got to locate the exact location of where this flange on the end here needs to be drilled into frame 6. And I need to then start locating these holes across the bottom and start drilling and putting temporary sheet metal fasteners to hold all of that together. So that's what I'm going to do next, is just keep working on getting these things into their correct position and held in with the clecos. The other thing that we're going to have to do is there's an angle that goes across the top of here, and I'm not going to fit that in place and drill those holes until I get this the side panels actually fit in here. So let me just keep working on this. I also want to drill out all the holes here and put the clecos in the corner here to hold this entire frame 6 together a little bit more sturdy. So yeah, let me just keep working on some more of this stuff, and I'll show you what it looks like when I get a little bit further here. So I've got the left side of the seat pan drilled into the bottom of the fuselage. The fit is pretty good. I had to spend a lot of time checking the distance from here to center, here to the other side, checking with a square across frame 4 to the back here. That actually seemed to work out the best for me because frame 4 on mine is actually quite square. So putting a square across here, I did a mark across the back here, then I flipped the square over like this and with that side out, and went from the edge of here back and put another mark here and then measured here to the edge just to see how centered I was, just to make sure I wasn't installing this a little bit crooked. The lines ended up pretty good, so I was able to drill this one on this side, and the only holes I didn't drill all the way, you can see there's a hole here and there's a hole here. That's where the landing gear brackets that go across the bottom of the fuselage are supposed to go. I just drilled the 16th inch hole there so that I could locate them on the underside of the fuselage. But otherwise this is all drilled out to the 3/32 holes. These will eventually get 1/8 inch rivets, but as I mentioned before, I try and do everything just to 3/32 just to hold it and then drill it out later. So what I'm going to do now is do the exact same thing on the other side here and see if I can get this one in place. Now, one of the things I did do, which worked out really well, is the cap that goes on the bottom here, which is already drilled, is nice and straight. And so once I was able to locate my lines here, see this goes on the outside here like this. I was able to just start drilling the holes and using the cap here as a template to drill through the fuselage once I got the cap straight. That worked really well, and then I was able to just attach the cap to the bottom of the the frame or web member here and then drill out those holes and then install it. So it definitely is helpful if you've already had just drilled out to exactly where it needs to go. You can just use that as your template when you're installing the seat rails here, the seat pan. So let me get this one drilled out and I'll show you what it looks like when it's done. All right, I got a few steps further here. I was able to get the other side drilled through for the side panel for the seat pan. And I also was able to reinstall frame 6 and go ahead and get the holes drilled at the end of these side supports for the seat installed. And so now I think what I'm going to do next is work on the angles. There's an angle that needs to go on the outside of each one of these side pieces here. It's using a 3/4 inch angle that we're going to cut down to 16 millimeters tall and 12 millimeters wide. That just stiffens up the side of this, and it also acts as the bottom support for the phenolic block that is going to go here for that flight control tube that goes across here. So I think that's what I'm going to work on next. There's not a lot of other parts that go to this. There is a seat belt bracket that goes here. There's also a angled part that goes here that supports the seat pan that gets installed in here. There's also another support that goes diagonally across up here. I didn't drill the holes for that because the seat pan actually has to come up and go right across the edge of frame 4 here, and then we need to actually bend and make these seatbelt supports that go up here. I didn't drill these in here when I made these because I wasn't sure of the exact angle that this plate needed to be at for the seat pan to sit perfectly flush with that. So I'll drill that in as we get to that point, but I think getting these angles in here and stiffening this up and getting this attached here in the front and the back here, I think would be the next thing to do. So I'm going to work on those angles, and I'll show you what they look like when I get them cut. So I finished making the 2 angles that we need to install on either side of the webs here for the seat box. So these were just 3/4 inch angles. I just went over to my mill and just cut one side down to 16 millimeters, the other side down to 12 millimeters, and then we taper the end of the 12 millimeter side as closest to frame 6 at about 50 millimeters out back to the end. And these are going to mount right on the inside of here. And we have to drill and rivet. These actually get solid rivets installed in here. So I think what I'm going to do next is go ahead and take these webs out. I'll go ahead and mount these on over the top of these sheet metal webs, and I'll go ahead and drill out all the holes that are already pre-drilled in the web into these parts here, and we'll get some temporary sheet metal fasteners in there and just prep these for riveting, because these need to get riveted on almost immediately. I don't think there's any reason to wait. I do need to make the seat belt bracket that goes here on either side that mounts on the other side of that angle. So the angle goes over here, and then there's a seat belt bracket that goes in here with a little hole on the top. So we'll go ahead and probably cut those out also, because we're going to want to rivet those onto here at the same time that we rivet this on that side. So I'm just going to keep working on this. Let me take this apart and get the holes drilled in these angles, and I'll come back when I'm done. So I now have both of the sides of the seat box drilled for these support angles that go in here that are for the seat back adjustment, and also for the seat belt attachment. Now, one of the things I did want to talk about is that the seat belt attachment is supposed to go right here in these pre-drilled holes. Now, in looking around at the internet, I did find a document from the UK that talked about a modification that was required by the Light Aircraft Association there to strengthen the seatbelt bracket. Now, if we go over to the drawings here, this is the seatbelt bracket that I'm talking about. This is the actual, CAD dimensions here, but it's a doubler plate that basically gets riveted onto the top of the side panel for the seat box. And what the Light Aircraft Association is recommending is, let's see here, is a doubler that's increased in size that actually goes over to the rivets on either side of the original plate that's supposed to go here in the center, and to also double the thickness from 40 thousandths to 80 thousandths. Now, I've talked to other CriCri builders, and it sounds like most people have not done this modification. It doesn't sound like it's required from a safety standpoint, although it was determined on inspection of at least one CriCri that either this bracket had been damaged or had been cracked in some way, or maybe the hole elongated. I'm not really sure because they don't really go into the details. But I'm thinking that since we know this potentially could be a problem, I don't see why, if we're building a brand new airplane, why we shouldn't just incorporate this one service bulletin basically into the CriCri. This is actually put up by the PFA, and it's considered a classification A, and inspection and modification considered mandatory by the PFA. So I'm going to go ahead and do this modification on mine. It's very easy to do because the rivet hole here and the rivet hole here and all these rivet holes are already there. So it's just a matter of making a bigger plate that we rivet in a slightly different spot. And so it's an easy modification to do now, and if it's potentially going to save me from having to come back and repair the seatbelt attachment later on, I figure I might as well do it. So I'm going to go ahead and cut out these seatbelt attachments right now, and we're going to look at installing those next. One goes here, one goes on the other side. And after I get these drilled and put into place, we're going to move forward and start working on the attachment of these to the angles that we have put onto frame 4. And there's a couple rivet holes that need to be drilled out here. There's a bolt hole that needs to be drilled out here. And then we'll start working on the phenolic block that holds the flight control tube that mounts across the back of frame 4. And so we're just going to kind of keep working on finishing up the little things for these seat rails until we're ready to actually start making the seat pan, which gets installed inside of there. So let me go ahead and get the seat belt brackets cut out, and we'll start fitting those into place. All right, I was able to drill the holes and get the seat belt strap mounting bracket installed. These end up being massive. I think if my airplane's overweight, I'm going to blame it on these. But yeah, I mean, considering these are twice as thick as the original specified ones in the plans were, and easily double the size when you consider the added amount of material that was added on there, but shouldn't have any problems with these, so I guess safety first. So we've got those done. What I'm going to do next is go ahead and try and see if I can drill these holes here that are in this angle into the front of here and see if I can get these actually attached to frame 4. This is going to be a little bit difficult because I pre-drilled these into this angle, and although I can access these two larger holes that are for the bearing support, I'm not so sure I can get a drill or an angle drill into the two bottom rivet holes in there, and those are going to be the ones that I might just have to figure out how to mark onto the sides of here, take these out, and then drill them outside of the airplane and put it back in, and hopefully they line up. I'm not sure of any other way to do it. I'll see if I can get my angle drill in there, but I know the bottom one for sure. There's no way I can get to that one. So yeah, let me start drilling these holes. It's really these three. There's two rivets on the bottom, and then there's one here that's for the bolt that goes through for the phenolic block. This other hole here is for the other top end of the phenolic block that we're going to make, and we'll be making that shortly after I get the 3 holes down at the bottom drilled. So let me see if I can get these reinstalled and see if I can get those holes drilled, and I'll show you what it looks like when they're done. So I was able to get both sides of the side panels for the seat pan here drilled out. I was able to get the 2 lower rivet holes drilled out. Those I had to just mark using just an 1/8 inch drill bit in my finger and just making a little spot on the sheet metal and then drilling them through outside of the airplane. The upper one here, I was able to put a cleco in here and hold this in place with clecos across the bottom, and then I was able to drill this one out using a number 10 with my angle drill. There was enough clearance there. So I've got the lower bolt hole for the tube support that we need to create. And so I've got almost everything done now with the side supports, and it's now time for me to go ahead and make the phenolic block that's going to go in here. And this is the tubing that is supposed to be held in place with those blocks. This is an 1.25 inch tube, and what we're supposed to do is make basically a 60 millimeter by 60 millimeter block that has to fit on top of this angle here. It's got to attach to these 2 bolt holes here, and then we're going to create a 3rd bolt hole over here to attach it to the side support. Now I was thinking about cutting those out on my CNC machine, but I think what I'm going to do with these is actually cut these out by hand. Part of the reason is I want to double check the measurements from the top here and back for where that hole is supposed to go, so I try and get that as exact as possible. Since we've kind of messed around with the dimensions of the spar box a little bit using different size angles, I just want to make sure that I kind of make the block, fit it in here, and then I'll go ahead and take measurements and mark the block and then drill that 1.25 inch hole into that block. Now, drilling that 1.25 inch hole is a bit of a concern too. So what I'm thinking about doing is I thought about maybe using a hole saw, 1.25 inch, but I'll have to test that on another piece to find out if it's actually going to make a loose hole or if this is actually going to fit in there tightly, because we need a snug fit, and we're going to make it so that it clamps around this. But what I'm thinking about doing is I have a 4-jaw chuck for my lathe. So I think if I make the block, I get the block fit in here, I drill all the holes into it, and then I can take a measurement over from the top of the spar and from the side of the spar and mark the block, and then I can mount that block in my 4-jaw chuck in my lathe and actually make a perfectly round hole with the lathe. And I'm thinking about just doing that for both of these blocks instead of trying to cut them out on the CNC machine. So I'm going to start off right now, just cut a 60 by 60 block, and it's got to be angled and tapered a little bit at the bottom to fit flat against here and fit across here. And I'll actually get all of the bolt holes drilled into the blocks, get them completely fit in, and then we'll worry about drilling out the 1.25 inch hole once these are all fit into place. So let me get those cut, and I'll show you what they look like when I start the fit process here. So I have the left side phenolic block fit into place in its preliminary position. So what I was able to do is I cut a 60 by 60 phenolic block. I then fit it in here until it was flush on the bottom, so I had to actually angle the bottom of this like 1.3 degrees or so. And I just kept fitting it in here until it fit flush against the top and flush against the bottom angle here. I then had to radius the bottom corner of the phenolic block to fit inside of this radius for this angle. And then I started just drilling out the holes. So I've got all 3 of the bearing block mounting holes drilled into place, the 2 that are part of frame 4, and also the one that's part of this angle assembly here. And now that I have this in there, it's of course bolted in here solid as a rock. Not going to move at all. I just used hardware store nuts and washers on the other side, so I didn't wear out any of my expensive lock nuts, aircraft quality lock nuts. So now that I've got this side done, I'm going to do the exact same thing over here on the other side. I'll go ahead and cut another 60 by 60 block and just trim it to fit in here and start drilling out the holes. Once we get both of these into this configuration, what I'll do is we'll start measuring over and down, and we'll mark exactly where the center of the hole should be on this block and the other block. They should be in exactly the same position. But once I do that, then I'll be able to start drilling out this 1.25 inch hole to fit this 1.25 inch pipe that needs to fit through there. Once we get the holes done, then we'll come back and I'll make sure that I've got the clearances here sanded out. I haven't actually notched out this angle down here. As you can see, the sheet metal's angled, but I didn't even notch that out because I wanted to get the hole in the block so I could see exactly where my clearance needed to be for this fitting, which should be accurate right now on frame 4, but also this bottom support fitting for the seat mount. So let me go ahead and do the exact same thing I did over here and get that block created and into position, and then we'll look at finishing them up. So I now have both phenolic blocks mounted behind frame 4 here. I just took the bolt out here on the upper mount, and you do have to create an 80 thousandths washer that has to fit in here behind the mounting plate here for this bolt hole to equal the thickness of the angle that goes across the bottom and the 20 thousandths skin material, which ends up being about 80 thousandths. So what I did though is I created a template here that's got a small hole in the bottom of it, and this is made to fit over the top of frame 4 right about here, with the correct dimensions down of that hole from the top of the frame and from the frame back. So I should be able now to use this to just mark on the blue tape behind it exactly where the center of this 1.25 inch hole needs to be. I'm going to do that on both of these just to make sure that I get this as straight as possible across here and get the correct alignment. And then what I think I'm going to do is I have a 4-jaw chuck for my lathe that I should be able to mount this phenolic block in, line up the center of it with the hole here, and then go ahead and drill the hole here and widen it out to 1.25 inch using my lathe. That's what I'm going to attempt to do. Again, I thought about using a hole saw, but I just wasn't sure that was going to be an accurate enough hole. So I'm trying to just see if I have a method of doing it more accurate than just, you know, a wooden hole saw. I'm going to try and do that. So let me go ahead and mark these. I'm going to go ahead and put one of these on the lathe, see if I can actually make a hole in here. I have no idea how well my cutting tools are going to work on phenolic, but we will see. So let me get a hole in each one of these and we'll see what it looks like when I'm done. Okay, so I just got back a minute ago from the lathe, and using the holes that I marked onto these blocks with that template, I was able to center that hole on my lathe using a four position chuck. So using that, I was able to drill through exactly that center, and then I was able to just use regular metal cutting boring tools to bore out this hole wider and wider and wider. I did that with both these blocks. I brought them back here and I reinstalled them. And the other thing I did is I went ahead and cut the tube that I had. So I had a 36-inch tube. I just cut it in half. It's a little bit long still, but I'm just going to use a 1.5 foot anyway for it. You can only buy this tubing from Aircraft Spruce in 1 foot increments. So I just bought 3 feet so I could get 2 tubes out of it. So anyway, I put the tube in here, clamped everything down, got all the bolts back in position, and now I can see that I can turn this tube with just a tiny bit of friction, small amount of friction. It fits perfectly into position here. And of course, what we're going to end up doing with these blocks is we're going to cut these blocks and we're going to drill a bolt hole through the top here down into across the cut there and make an ability to screw a bolt in and clamp this together to adjust the tightness of this tube in here, which is going to be the flap control tube. So when you move the flap lever, it's going to move this and move the adjustments on the flaperons back and forth, using this tube to transfer from side to side, from wing to wing. So this came out perfect. I am so pleased with this because this was fairly complicated with getting these blocks cut and fit in here, get all of these holes that were in frame 4 on these brackets attached and fit to the side panels of the seat pan support here. So very pleased that now that I've got this all in here, I've got just the light friction on this tube, which is how it should be. So what am I going to do next? So we don't have a whole lot to finish up, at least with what I had planned for this tube and frame 6 and the seat pan. I am obviously going to go ahead and finish up these blocks. We got to bevel the corners. I do have to cut this block and then also put the bolt in place. So we'll work on that probably next. I'm probably just going to finish up everything here with frame 6 and the seat pan before I even bother with frame 5 that still needs to be bent and put into place here. But absolutely thrilled with how this is coming out. This was actually one of the things I was a little bit concerned about. And boy, there isn't a lot of clearance here, just so you're aware. I mean, I probably could notch these out if I needed to, but there's probably only about 1 millimeter or maybe 1.5 millimeters of clearance between this pipe and these other supports here on frame 4.